Hello, Gary. It looks like there's been a lot of discussion around the Modernization of Cosmetics Regulation Act.
Yeah, there sure has been. I think we need to have a little talk, Patty. Maybe we can get started and iron out some of these issues.
Yeah, absolutely. The cosmetic industry seems to be really struggling to understand MOCR and then comply with these new regulations, but it's really not too surprising when you have limited experience and limited resources to address these new regulations. We almost expect it. So Gary, would you mind talking a little bit about MOCR?
Yeah, so we go back, real short history, back to the end of 2022, actually December 29th, and the president signed into law this act and included many things, but also included some information about the cosmetics regulation and revising it. So there's a couple provisions in that act that are brand new for the cosmetic industry. We know that the establishment registration will need to be done every 2 years. In addition to that, every year there has to be a review, initially an entry, and then every year thereafter a review of the product listing. So these two events are now in regulations. It's going to be an additional requirement for the cosmetic people to understand that and meet those timings.
Okay, Gary, but what about the Voluntary Cosmetic Registration Program, or the VCRP? Because they had a program that started in 1972, and then in 2018 they had an online program that started. What's going on there?
Yeah, that you bring up a good point. The FDA said about half of industry voluntarily participated in that registration, and the FDA shut it down beginning of 2023. And the reason for that was they were preparing for the new cosmetic direct portal. So that information was not transferred over to the new database. And I think the FDA just turned their attention to, laying out and launching the new portal and getting in place all the new regulations and infrastructure to support the new regulations. So yeah, good point. If some manufacturers had been participating in that, they have a little bit of an idea of what to expect under registration and also listing. Now, in addition to that, there were a number of other new requirements. So safety substantiation, there's a labeling requirement that needs to be adhered to. If a product is intended only for professional use, that particular phrase needs to be added to the label. There is another significant requirement related to adverse events. So collecting adverse events and determining which ones are serious and then reporting the serious ones is going to be a new requirement. And then ultimately there's a good manufacturing practice that needs to come in place, and that all of those are going to be new requirements, and some are a little bit difficult to implement if you don't have a good regulatory framework to build upon.
Thank you, but I was wondering, I had thought that cosmetic manufacturers were already doing some of these requirements for MOCR, weren't they?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, think about it, labeling, for example. The cosmetics have been labeling, for years and years, but now there is an additional modification that needs to be done. Some companies might have been collecting safety information, and even some companies may have been tracking some adverse events. But this law puts in place a really high bar on each one of these particular activities. So it's going to be some effort to elevate what they already had to meet the new requirements. And for those companies that had not participated in any of those, it's going to be a significant struggle to get all of those particular regulations in place and meet every one of those.
It really sounds like it. Are there any exclusions for some of these cosmetic businesses that we should be aware of?
Well, yeah, there's a couple exclusion the FDA has put in place. In some cases, the exclusion is for a particular cosmetic establishment type, what type of business you're in. So, a hairdresser or something like that might have a product that would be exempt. So, and there's a couple other establishment types that would qualify as outside the scope of this particular regulation. Now, in addition to that, there are some exclusions provided to small businesses. So if your annual income is less than $1 million, and you don't participate or put on the market products that have a criteria, don't stay in the body for a period of time or not injected, that sort of thing. So there is some criteria where small businesses are also exempt. So that actually is able to help, those particular firms in complying with the regulations.
Thank you, Gary. That's very helpful. I hate to ask, but is there anything else that we should be mindful of for MOCRA?
Yeah, well, be careful what you ask for, right? The additional provisions are related to the FDA. So the FDA is now given some authority that they didn't have before, and they're also given some tasks. So they have a to-do list as well. So in this regulation, they were given some additional authority to inspect and review records at a particular establishment. They can actually suspend a facility registration, and that would really put the business out of operation for that period of time. They have recall authority, and there's some enforcement connected with these particular provisions as well. So those are the things that the FDA has new authority. They were also given some tasks to do some evaluations, and we'll talk a little bit later about those. But yeah, that's the in a nutshell what the MOCRA regulation is all about. Mostly cosmetic requirements, and then also some FDA requirements.
Thank you, Gary. Now, I understand MOCRA was signed into law on December 29th, 2022, and there were some implementation dates that were starting 1 year later, but where are we now?
Yeah, right. That's a good question. We get that quite frequently, and I'm sure when you talk to clients, they're asking, well, what's the timing of all this? So throughout the 2023, we already mentioned the voluntary establishment registration and listing was retired, and going back in like May timeframe. And then throughout the balance of 2023, the FDA worked on firming up the guidance documents, building the Cosmetic Direct website, and putting into place some provisions for electronic submissions using structured product labeling files, so SPL files. And then at the very end, now remember, this was passed December 29th, 2022, and there were some 1 year milestones that were built into that particular regulation. So December 29th, 2023, we see some activity here on the chart. So the safety substantiation, the professional use, and the adverse event report management and reporting thereof all started December 29, 2022. Now, in addition to that, we talked about the establishment registration or the facility registration, I should be saying, and the product listing was also timed to start December 29th, 2023. Now, there was some industry indication that they weren't quite ready. I also think the FDA wasn't quite ready with their portal. So they actually pushed that back 6 months. So we're looking at, July 1st of this year. So there's a short period of time to have reaction. Now, looking forward, at the end of this year, 2024, there's another milestone. So remember, the listing takes place every year. So the end of this year, December 29th, 2023, there's a listing requirement. In addition to that, you'll see an additional requirement for labeling. So that labeling needs to be added to the, or the contact information has to be added to the label. And then there's some things in the future. You'll see them in the purple diagram where the FDA has some tasks to do. They have some evaluation of the talc asbestos, and they might come up with a ruling about how that is represented on the label, perhaps some warning or identification of the fact that it may contain talc. And then there's some additional requirements for the perhaps the label. There's some fragrance allergens that most likely will need to be reported. And then finally, the other to be decided date would be the FDA rolling out some good manufacturing practice requirements. And we talked a little bit earlier about special provisions for the small businesses. We believe from what the guidance says in that the good manufacturing practices might be slightly more forgiving for the small businesses and then more stringent for large businesses. So we see some activity here in the future. Some things are already passed and due. And we have some activity just a few weeks and then ongoing through the next few years.
Thank you, Gary. That's extremely helpful. Now, I know here at ReedTech, Gary, we recommend 4 steps in implementing a MOCRA solution. I think it would be really helpful if you could walk through those 4 steps at a high level so that folks can understand.
Yeah, that's something that we touch on. At least I kind of nicknamed them the 4 C's in this particular case. The first C would be create a plan. So make sure that you have the correct people in the team to react to this particular regulation, and make sure that you have an opportunity to understand what the regulations are. So this is kind of, a little bit of a learning curve, and then figure out the gap analysis. So where are you short? Where are you now? Where do you need to be? And how are you going to get there? And then there is the next C would be to construct that environment. So here you need to start putting in place some of those procedures and policies so that you meet the requirements. So we're talking about the safety substantiation data, and this could be collecting some information that you have but just kind of tucked away, but now you have to make it readily available for the FDA. Make sure you update that labeling, get that adverse event management system in place, and then eventually you can start preparing now, but eventually you'll need to establish that good manufacturing practices. Now, the next C, so we have create, construct, and now collect. So you want to start collecting that data that needs to be reported, and it would include the facility information, the product listing information, and make sure that you have a method to submit that. So there's a couple options, as you know, Patty, of submitting data directly into the website. You can make use of the SPL structure and enter the data into SPL and submit it electronically through the gateway. Now the 4C, we have create data, create the plan, construct the environment, collect the data, and then the 4C would be to complete the submission. So make sure that facility registration information, product listing is all submitted to the FDA through whatever method that you end up with. And remember, that's not the only data that needs to be submitted. Any of that serious adverse event data that you have would need also to be submitted to the FDA. So there's the 4 C's there. Just keep them in mind and work your way through those. And I think that'll help organize your response to the new regulations. I'm glad we could set some time aside and talk about this. Hopefully those that are able to listen in are finding the things helpful. Thank you very much for your time, Patty. This was great.
Thank you, Gary. It was wonderful. Thank you.